Criminal profiling is an investigative tool that law enforcement uses to help track down and identify criminals. It is a forensic technique that gathers information about evidence found at crime scenes and also analyzes the behavior patterns and characteristics of a perpetrator to help determine the most likely factors of the suspect's life, personality, lifestyle, thoughts, and motivations. Criminal profiling has also been used to determine whether crimes are linked and have been committed by the same perpetrator. Early roots of criminal profiling can be traced back to the late 1800s in England, where police detectives used autopsy results and crime scene evidence to make predictions about the personality and lifestyle of Jack the Ripper. In the late 1980s, a British professor known as Professor David Cantor developed a method known today as the bottom-up approach, which is a system used to use available data known about a specific crime or crime scene to make predictions about the characteristics of an offender. Professor Cantor became known internationally in the late 1980s as he was the first criminal profiler to help the police catch an offender using psychology. In today's case, it was the contribution of Professor of Psychology David Cantor that helped catch the Birmingham Tower Block rapist. In Birmingham, England, in the late 1980s, the city was put on high alert, with many living in fear for their elderly relatives and friends, because there was a prowler going around raping and sexually assaulting elderly women. The offender was targeting the most vulnerable and frail of society. He was targeting elderly women, mainly in their 70s and 80s, that lived in tower blocks. This is the story of the Birmingham Tower Block rapist. This is the story of Adrian Babb. On January the 4th, 1986, an elderly 79-year-old woman was getting into a lift in a block of flats in Vaughanton House on the Woodview Estate in Lee Bank, Birmingham, when she was dragged out of the lifts by an unknown man and hauled up to the roofs of the block of flats. There she was raped. Unbelievably and heartbreakingly, just 7 months later, the exact same thing happened to her again in the same block of flats by the same perpetrator, where she was followed into the lifts, dragged up to the roof floor and raped again. In the same year of 1986, an elderly disabled woman in her 80s was sitting at home in her flat when what she described as a youth burst into her home and pounced on her. There, he carried out a very serious sexual assault on the woman in her 80s and fled when a neighbour arrived. The young man had also attempted to rape two other elderly women aged 72 and 50 years old in another tower block, which was also on the Woodview Estate in Edgbaston. But he was unsuccessful, and the elderly women had a narrow escape. On September the 28th, 1986, an 80-year-old woman who was disabled and could not walk and was also senile was attacked and raped in Woburn House, also on the Woodview Estate. A month later, on Sunday the 19th of October 1986, the sex attacker struck again, this time at Buckland House, also on the Woodview Estate in Birmingham, where he followed an 81-year-old pensioner into a lift, and when she tried to get out of the lift when it arrived on her floor, the young man stopped her from leaving the lift. Despite being 81 years of age, the elderly woman put up a fierce struggle, but being bigger than her, the perpetrator simply lifted the pensioner off her feet and carried the old lady up 5 flights of stairs to the 12th floor. There, he stripped the terrified pensioner naked before raping her for 40 minutes. All the victims of these sexual assaults all described the same perpetrator. He was described as a black teenager who wore a black leather bomber jacket with white trainers with blue stripes down the side of them. Based on all the victims giving the same description, police knew they were looking for the same man for all the rapes, with police saying, "He is obviously a youth with psychiatric problems. I am becoming more concerned because the sex attacks are getting worse." Based on the description given by all the victims, police released an e-fit of the young man they were looking to question. On Monday the 15th of June, 1987, at around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, an 82-year-old elderly woman returning home from a shopping trip enters Wickett's Tower, a tower block in Edgbaston, Birmingham, which was just off the Pershaw Road and near the cricket ground in Birmingham. As the elderly woman, who was just 5 foot tall, entered the lift, she was grabbed from behind and the attacker put his hand over her mouth to stop her from screaming and told her that if she kept quiet, he wouldn't hurt her. The 82-year-old pensioner told him she had no money, so take her jewellery instead. But chillingly, the man said, "No, I don't want your money. I want you." The attacker then took the elderly woman into the lift up to the 19th floor and then dragged her out onto the stairwell that led to the roof and forced her to undress. He then subjected the 82-year-old to a sustained and serious sexual assault. After he'd finished, the attacker told the pensioner, "Don't tell anybody or tell the police or you'll be sorry." He then helped the 82-year-old to put her coat back on, then fled. His elderly victim was left shocked and distressed, and the police were called and the woman's relatives came to comfort and support her. The 82-year-old victim described the rapist as a well-spoken black man in his early 20s of around 5 foot 10 inches tall with short afro hair. She also described him as young, very smart and very, very well groomed. He wore a red striped jumper, dark trousers and trainers. During the rape, the perpetrator had told his 82-year-old victim that his name was Leroy and that he was from Northfield in Birmingham. Police believed that the perpetrator had been lying in wait in the reception area of the tower block, waiting for a victim, and they feared that he would strike again and warned elderly women to be on their guard when out alone. The police also made house-to-house inquiries, speaking with the residents of the tower block, but nobody had seen or heard anything. An incident room was set up at Woodbridge Road Police Station in Moseley, where police were investigating the rapes. The 82-year-old victim told reporters that she would like to be the one to punish the perpetrator when he is caught by birching him. To birch someone means to beat someone with a thin item, such as a switch from a tree, on their bare buttocks. Women were urged to make contact with their neighbours, visit each other regularly, and set up systems of alarms and checks, whilst Birmingham City Council were being consulted about extra security locks for women and to check and fix lighting in corridors and stairwells of tower blocks, and making sure that alarms in lifts were always working. On the 6th of December 1987, the rapist struck again. This time it was his youngest victim, a 56-year-old woman who had entered a lift in Pleck House, Winterbourne Croft in Druids Heath, Birmingham, and this time he used a knife. The 56-year-old woman was followed into the lift, and when she asked the man who had walked in behind her which floor he wanted, he grabbed her arm, put his hand over her mouth, and then he held a knife to her chest and threatened to kill her if she screamed. He then took her to the roof of the tower block and raped her. Three months later, on Friday the 4th of March 1988, a 74-year-old pensioner went to visit a friend. Upon return to her home in a tower block, Vancouver House on Benmore Road in Edgbaston, Birmingham, that evening, as she got into the lift, a muscular black man followed her into the lift, and as the doors closed, the man dragged the 74-year-old, as she screamed, up to the 10th floor landing that led to the roof. As the perpetrator spoke to the 74-year-old in what she described as a quiet, pleasant voice, and told her that he would not hurt her, and he seemed anxious to keep reassuring her that he wouldn't hurt her. He then ripped off some of her clothing and pinned her to the floor. The muscly and well-built rapist then sat on top of the 74-year-old pensioner and performed what police have described as a vile act, which shocked the 74-year-old woman badly. The 74-year-old elderly woman had no immediate family and had lived alone in the tower block for several years. She was so distressed after the rape that she could not bring herself to report it until the next day. Police and social care workers were helping the elderly lady, who was said to be suffering badly from trauma, with police saying, "One thing is certain, this seriously psychologically disturbed man will strike again, and we are desperate for any information to help catch him." This was now the 7th elderly woman to be raped in a tower block that she lived in, by what police believed to be the same man in all the assaults. The man appeared to be targeting frail grannies that lived in tower blocks in and around the Edgbaston area and around Bristol Road and Pershore Road of the Birmingham area, with one incident happening in Druids Heath. Police were getting desperate to find whoever it was that was traumatizing elderly women that were supposed to be enjoying their later years in life, free from the fear of being raped. It would be almost 18 months before the sex attacker struck again. On Thursday the 3rd of August 1989, a 79-year-old elderly woman was getting into a lift in Faraday House on Belbourne Road in Lee Bank after coming home from shopping, when she was suddenly ambushed with a knife that the perpetrator held to her throat. The perpetrator cut the woman's nose with the knife, but despite being elderly, the 79-year-old put up a frenzied fight. After the rape, the man told the 79-year-old that he wanted to take a picture of her naked, but then he fled. Eyewitnesses told police that they saw the man who fit the description of the attacker waiting for a bus at Ladywood Middleway, and it was believed that after the attack, he got away by bus. The sex attacker was getting more and more confident in his sex attacks on the elderly, and they were becoming more and more perverted. But little did the attacker know that the net was closing in on him, and this would be his final rape. Desperate to catch the rapist, police turned to Professor David Cantor, head of psychology at the University of Surrey, to get a psychological profile of the offender done. A new technique at the time that had never been used before in the West Midlands police force. Supplied with all the details of the crime and a description of the rapist, Professor David Cantor concluded, because the criminal had a limited range of locations where he had committed the crimes, a limited range of victims, with all of them being elderly women, and a limited range of actions, this suggested that the criminal was operating in a limited world, since all the crimes committed occurred within a 1-mile radius in and around Edgbaston. All the victims reported that the offender was a young black man, athletic and without body scent, and that he always carried a sports bag. Based on this information, Professor Cantor concluded that the perpetrator was aged 22 and lived in Highgate in Birmingham. He predicted that the perpetrator had a criminal record and lived in a high-rise tower block or had previously lived in one. The professor predicted that the perpetrator had started committing sex crimes in his late teens and collected adult porn. He also predicted that the rapist was sports orientated and possibly had a love for bodybuilding or a single sport that he played regularly. The professor also predicted that the perpetrator had a job where he worked with the elderly and that he was unable to have sexual relations with women his own age. The hunt for the tower block rapist was the biggest ever police hunt in Birmingham at that time. Hundreds of officers carried out hours of painstaking inquiries, with 3 major incident rooms set up and a specialist home office computer called Holmes being used to sift and catalogue information. During the last rape of the 79-year-old woman, where the victim had put up a frenzied fight, the attacker had grabbed the stair rail to steady himself. Forensic fingerprinting done on the stair rail had found the fingerprint, and when tested, the fingerprint matched a suspect. The suspect had also left behind a footprint which could not be seen by the naked eye, but was picked up on an electric forensic device called a zapper. It was the imprint of a pair of Adidas trainers. The fingerprint had linked back to 22-year-old Adrian Babb. On the evening of Tuesday, the 8th of August, just 5 days after the rape, at 6 p.m, as Adrian Babb returned home from work, a group of police detectives were waiting at his door to arrest him. Every single prediction that the professor, David Cantor, had predicted about the offender was correct. Adrian Babb admitted committing all the rapes, and police detectives recorded all of his police interviews. Adrian Babb was then taken by a police car to point out all the crime scenes, which he then went on to describe what happened at each crime in gruesome detail. He never once showed remorse, and when asked why he committed the crimes, Adrian told police, "Maybe it's just the fact that they were there at the right time and I was there at the wrong time, and me being foolish, I went through with it." But when questioned further on exactly why he had sexually assaulted old age pensioners, all Adrian Babb would say was, "I like women's bodies." Adrian Babb also admitted to police to stealing women's underwear from washing lines. Detective Chief Inspector John Ashby, who led the inquiry, said, "I am convinced he did a stack more that he has not told us about. These were really sick crimes. Several of the women he abused were so badly upset they had to move out of their homes and were rehoused in sheltered accommodation by the council. They walked in fear whilst Adrian Babb was at large, and they were petrified and shocked when he attacked them. And they still live in fear and will continue to do so for the rest of their lives. Adrian Babb is a strong young man who picked old, frail and kindly ladies who a normal chap of his age would be proud to help across the road or open a door for." Adrian Babb was a 22-year-old who lived in a tower block in Highgate. He lived in Baskerville Tower, Kenstonecroft, with his parents, Elaine and Edison Babb, on the 4th floor. He was an only child and the apple of his mother's eye. His mother, Elaine, was said to be proud of her son and doted on him. He had attended Queensbridge Comprehensive School in Kings Heath, Birmingham, and then Swanshurst College at Billesley, where he obtained 9 CSEs. He then enrolled at Bourneville College on a technical course, but failed his exams, so transferred to Matthew Bolton College. His teachers said that he wasn't keen on academic learning, but was mad about sports, especially football. He wasn't an outstanding football player, but he regularly participated in local amateur football teams as well as local sporting competitions. In December 1987, he went to a local football match, but the match had been cancelled due to the pitch being waterlogged. Upon hearing that the match had been cancelled, Adrian Babb was said to have flown into a rage and left. It was then that he spotted his youngest victim, who he followed to Pleck House in Druids Heath and raped at knife point. This was his only rape outside of the circumference he had targeted all his other victims in. Adrian Babb worked at Coxmoor Leisure Centre in Kings Heath, Birmingham, as a swimming attendant, where he supervised elderly swimmers. He was described as a model employee with no complaints against him or his behaviour. A fellow female employee who had worked alongside him said, "Adrian was a quiet lad, and everyone here was absolutely stunned when we found out what he'd done. It really is quite terrifying that he managed to get a job here, because lots of our activities are for the over 50s, and he could have easily targeted one of the elderly ladies for a sex attack. Lots of the young girls who came swimming flocked around him, chatting to him and vying for his attention, but he didn't seem to want to know any of them." In September of 1987, Adrian had applied for a part-time job at a youth club, and almost a year later, in July 1988, was when he was employed at Coxmoor Leisure Centre. Upon a search of his home, police found nude girly magazines in his room. Adrian Babb claimed that he had slept with 2 women consensually in his life. One, a 37-year-old, and the other woman in her 20s. But when questioned by police, both of the women denied it, saying they knew him but had never ever been intimate with him in their life. To all who knew him, Adrian appeared to be a hard-working model son, but female neighbours described him as creepy, saying that he often hung around in the corridors of the tower block and on landings, just staring at them. The caretaker of Baskerville Tower, where Adrian lived with his parents, said, "There always seemed to be something a bit odd and distant about him, but to discover he has done this is a big shock." When Adrian Babb's mum, Elaine Babb, was told that her son was the Birmingham tower block rapist that had gone around raping old women in tower blocks, she was distraught and broke down in uncontrollable hysterics. She was so distraught that police were unable to interview her. During Adrian's time in prison, his mum visited him regularly. A psychiatric report was drawn up on Adrian Babb, where he revealed that the reason for his sex attacks was that he was angry at what he had described as being forced to plead guilty to a charge of indecent assault in 1985 in what he said was a crime that he did not commit. 4 years earlier, in 1985, when Adrian Babb was only 18 years old, a 62-year-old woman was in Birmingham Central Library choosing some books, when she said that she was indecently assaulted by a young teenage boy. She said that she then saw the teenage boy squat down by a pile of books, and she immediately went and reported the assault to librarians, and the police were called. When the police arrived, Adrian Babb at first denied the sexual assault, but when questioned further, he admitted that he had touched the 62-year-old woman accidentally. The then 18-year-old Adrian Babb was arrested and charged with indecent assault for touching the 62-year-old in Birmingham Central Library and was found guilty and convicted. He was given 2 years probation. Adrian denied the crime and said he'd been forced to plead guilty for it, and so, because of this, he claims that he set out to get revenge on all elderly women, saying, "Well, I might as well do what I was supposed to have done when I was convicted." The psychiatric report also stated that Adrian Babb said that he never found pleasure in sexual relations and that he really regretted the sexual assaults that he'd committed. The psychiatrist's report also stated that the only mitigating factor is that once he was caught, Adrian had admitted everything. During his trial, it was also revealed that Adrian Babb had also raped an 88-year-old pensioner on a grassy area between Spring Road in Edgbaston and Ryland Road, also in Edgbaston. Adrian Babb appeared in the dock wearing a white t-shirt with the words Matthew Bolton College on the front. Upon sentencing, Judge Turner said, "Over a period of 3 years, you have mounted a campaign of attacks on elderly and lonely women. It is suggested that you believe, and there is evidence to support it, this was in some way a revenge for an offence which you had pled guilty to, but to which you thought you ought not to have done, because you were pressured into making an admission." Adrian MacDonald Babb was found guilty of rape and indecent assault, and on Thursday the 21st of December 1989 was sentenced to 16 years in jail, to which the judge said he passes the minimum sentence, which is his duty to the public, but equally reflects the gravity of the case. Adrian Babb broke down in tears as he was jailed, and upon hearing the sentence, his mother Elaine Babb also broke down in tears. An inquiry was made into how Adrian Babb was able to get a job as a swimming pool attendant when he had a sex crime conviction. His employers at Coxmoor Leisure Centre said that he was twice checked out via police when he applied for the job, but it didn't show any convictions. Birmingham City Council were mounting an inquiry to find out why. Based on the success and accuracy of the psychologist's criminal profile of the characteristics of the offender, criminal profiling is now a routine part of serious crimes.